Salut à tous, bienvenue sur la chaîne de Pasto, j'espère que vous allez bien. On se retrouve aujourd'hui pour parler de Diablo 4.
At this point, we can talk about some of the beta learnings. We had a beta. The community gave a lot of feedback, and you folks took in that feedback, digested it,
Ah,
and
les
transformed it
learnings de la
into
bêta.
actionable
Qu'est-ce qu'ils
change
ont
in the game. You
appris?
want to talk to some of the things that were changed?
Yeah, I keep saying we're going to talk about that. Now is the time. So let's start out with looking at some of the class changes that we did. So there's a lot of text
Alors,
on the
les
screen.
changements des classes.
You've had an opportunity, if you've been following along, to check out our blog that documents a lot of the changes that we were able to make as a result of feedback from players in the 2 beta weekends, and also from data that we get. You know, we get a lot of data.
Barbarian
How many
damage
times someone
reduction.
dies in
Bah oui.
you know, our necromancer's
Au fait.
dying a lot in this dungeon, or is this boss killing barbarians a lot of times, and we can use that alongside player data to identify areas where there might be a class deficiency, or areas where maybe something is exceptionally strong compared to other things that are balanced to be the same power. And so, in
Plus de
general, one of
dommages
the
des
things that
compagnons
we
pour le druide,
looked
ok.
at from those 2 beta
Réduction des
weekends
cooldowns
is
de l'ulti.
feedback that the barbarian
Ok.
and the druid, the melee classes, felt weaker than the necromancer, rogue, and sorcerer. And there are a lot of aspects to that. So there's some
Amélioration des
nuance in
soreurs
here, right?
solides.
Like for the barbarian, we felt we identified that the barbarian, at low levels in particular, needed more damage reduction sort of built in. And so we added this passive damage reduction. So you're just going to take 10% less damage, just flat, no matter what choices you're making as a barbarian, and that's to account for some of the ways the barbarian has to get up close and personal with their sort of weapon-heavy spec. We also identified elements of the druid that you could really benefit from some buffs. In fact, I think Riker, you got to play the druid a little bit.
I did, yeah. So honestly, when I first saw the patch notes, I was like, oh, I was hoping the druid would have gotten a bit more love with regards to spirit generation. But then I played an endgame build of, it was a perma werewolf storm druid. So I'm a werewolf who's casting storm skills, and the playstyle was so tight, it flowed so well. It just all gelled together once you got the full kit, the full build together. And I went into this week with a certain class favoritism, where I had rogue, I had necromancer, sorceress, barbarian, and then druid in dead last. I'm completely confused now. I think druid might be my favorite now.
Yeah, it's, another thing that we did, if we take a look at the classes again, another thing that we did in terms of the melee classes is we took a look at bosses and monsters, in particular their attacks that deal damage in an area where it feels like there wasn't a way for the melee class to deal damage effectively while also avoiding incoming damage, right? Because a lot of times you'll have the opportunity for a ranged class range class is sometimes choosing between getting a better position and doing more damage, damage per second. And a melee class is sometimes choosing between taking damage, because even with the case of a projectile, the projectile is originating in many cases from the monster and then traveling. So you have less time to react in some cases.
Charge ball damage.
And so we took a look at boss abilities and bosses that our data showed were much more deadly to melee classes, and we adjusted some of those abilities. Now, this also affects the necromancer class, because you might notice that we had a note here that states that summon minions will die more often. Now, we want the corpses to have sort of an economy. We want to have the sense that corpses are useful, you're using them to bring in more skeletons, and the necromancer pets, as a theme of this sort of bone class, they are a little bit more disposable, right? Like if a skeleton dies, you just pop out another one from a nearby corpse. So we want them to be, dying and getting resummoned. And we want to make sure that there are plenty of corpses, so you're not going into a boss and running out of, like, oh, I don't have any pets and I'm a pet builder. We certainly want to make sure that you have pets available, but we want them to be kind of coming back from time to time. So We increase the damage that they take a bit, but we also, I was talking about areas where bosses were doing too much damage to melee. We also took a look at cases where there were abilities that felt unfair for pets, where there was just like a huge damage in a huge area, and maybe it's no problem for a player to get out of it, but trying to micromanage your pets to get out of this.
Micromanage an army of skeletons around, yes.
That's not a fun gameplay that we're trying to capture specifically with the Necromancer class. So we modified the damage that those kinds of powers do to pets, both Necromancer and Druid pets, in fact.
Yeah, we do want to make sure that managing your minions to some degree is part of the mastery of playing a Necromancer, and that, like, when skeletons go down, you need to accommodate that and make sure that you have corpses that you've been generating or keeping on hold for some of these situations. We feel that is definitely part of the fantasy of the Necromancer class is needing to resummon, to your point, these kind of disposable soldiers that are supposed to be helping you. So we want to make sure that continues to hold true, but not to a point where like an army necro can't go fight bosses. That's obviously not what we're trying to build with any of these changes, of course. We just want to make sure that the Necromancer does get a chance to engage with those parts of the mechanics.
Now another...
I did get to play the Summoner Necro, and I was summoning my minions regularly, so it was something that was a continuous part of the gameplay, but I never found myself in a position where, oh, I'm out of minions, I'm out of corpses, so the corpse generation rate it felt good. I'll admit that passive minions is not my favorite playstyle. I would love the ability to direct them, but for what you intended to accomplish, I felt you did.
Yeah, so, one of the other areas of feedback, we have a note here that says, that might be a little bit confusing. It says, we reviewed the class skills to confirm that there were good options to get out of control impairing effects. In many cases, what we mean is unstoppable, which is the effect in Diablo 4 that clears all control impairing effects, crowd control effects, and makes you immune to them for the duration of that effect. So the classes are designed so that every class is intended to have access to a good set of options to clear crowd control, so that there is an interaction here between, monsters are doing crowd control and I have options to remove it, but I need to think about those options. And we saw feedback during the beta that at early levels, some classes felt like they didn't have enough options there. Riker, in your play at the higher levels, did you feel like that was still an issue?
I don't remember it being an issue at the high levels of play, no. Going back to my favorites, Barbarian now is my second favorite after being my fourth. Again, yeah, the melee playstyle I felt gelled really well with a high-level Barbarian. It all came together. I didn't feel I was being punished for being in melee. I didn't feel constantly crowd-controlled or an inability to gap close. He had the spears to bring enemies to me, the lunging attack to close the gaps, and a good toolkit to deal with everything.
Okay.
So the last thing I want to note on classes, of course, is that there are a few other changes beyond what you're seeing here. I think, some people called out Hydra changes. We made a lot of small changes to classes. There are also some cases like legendary powers. We updated legendary power effectiveness, which is sort of vague, but it's really just that there are a bunch of small details, and we're sort of tweaking them. The other thing I want to talk about is dungeons, right?
Yeah.
So we got a lot of feedback from players that there was a lot of running back in dungeons, and there were really two ways that we wanted to tackle this. First off, of course, if we have a situation where you're running back, we have a system that causes monsters to ambush you to make sure that it's not just running through an empty space. So we added more ambushes. But secondly, and this is really the more effective aspect of it, we changed the layouts of dungeons and where objectives were located in the dungeons.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Look at this. Graphic design is our passion.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wish that I made this graphic because it's.
I did laugh really hard when I saw this the first time.
So
I love it so much.
But I did not make it. But I think this is a great example. So this is one of the dungeons that players called out in beta, Hoarfrost Demise, right, as one that had a lot of run back. And one of the reasons that you can see here that it has so much run back is that the objectives are laid out in a way that you have to run down a long, narrow hallway to get to one, and then you have to run back it's a dead end, and then you have to run back down that narrow hallway. So we changed the layout of Hoarfrost Demise like this.
Right.
So you can see that the objectives, which are those diamond icons there on your screen, are along the main path of the dungeon. And remember now, in this case, the player has explored all of the dungeon and you can see all of the map.
Yeah.
But when you're playing through the dungeon, you don't the map is fogged. You haven't explored it yet. But it's set up in such a way that as you're exploring through the dungeon, you're going to naturally encounter those objectives along your way, and so you're not going down and then having to backtrack a long way.
Yeah, and in our objective view, this was going to lead to smiles. Yeah. This is good. But no, it's important. Like we want to make sure that as you're progressing the space, you are naturally coming across these objectives in a simpler way, as opposed to you need to kind of wander and kind of backtrack a lot more as part of that.
Yeah, and in fact, we identified a number of dungeons that got this feedback in beta, and we also, we were talking about nightmare dungeons. We also want to make sure that nightmare dungeons have this. We address this for nightmare dungeons as well, because it's a key replayability system, as we were just talking about earlier. This is another example of Cordragon Barracks. It's another dungeon that we saw a lot of feedback and screenshots from beta, where you can see that the objectives are set up such that clearly you're going to have to run back all the way back through that long hallway. You're going to spiral around. You have to go out. You have to explore out from those spirals, and you can end up getting confused and running back. Because the other thing that happens here is that if you've run to an objective and the next thing that you have is back along a path that you know about already, then why wouldn't you just run back along that path that's empty of monsters? It's not fun. It's more fun to kill monsters, but it's more efficient than exploring some unknown that might or might not lead back to it, right? So that's a key part of these layout changes as well. And if you take a look at the next shot here, you can see how we rearranged the objectives in Cordragon to ameliorate this.
Yeah. Now, these aren't the only changes that we made either. There's some other things we did to actually just straight up regular objectives. So there's things like, there are some dungeons where the players are asked to kill all the monsters inside a dungeon space. And in those situations, we've made it so once the players reach a certain threshold of monsters they've killed, rather than saying there are potentially as many as 50 zombies in this cave. After the player has killed, 49 zombies, they might still be normally looking around in the last corner where a zombie is kind of hiding in a closet someplace, right? In this situation, instead, once you reach a certain threshold of zombies that you've killed, now they actually begin chasing you down. They start looking for you in that situation, such that you don't need to go crawl through the entire space and explore every inch of unexplored area in that dungeon just to find the zombies. Some of them are going to come after you in those situations, which is a great change to make it a little bit easier to engage with those things. And then there's another one, we have features or dungeon objectives where the player is asked to go and collect anima, which are just these objects. They're these motes of energy that drop on the ground when you kill certain kinds of monsters. Sometimes you need to go and gather a whole bunch of these things and then bring them back to another area to deposit them. Sometimes it opens a door, might summon a boss, all kinds of things that we do with this. But in these situations now, when players are collecting this animal when they're running around the dungeon trying to find all these creatures and do these things, you're going to also gain various buffs by picking these up. You're going to gain some resource back for your class. You're going to get some other things. It's actually really great. When you actually deposit these things, you're going to get a health potion. So there's lots of things we're trying to do to make sure that those experiences help speed you up and feel great to engage with, while you're also going through a lot of the layout changes that Joe just talked about.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out kill all monsters, because players rightly identified a couple of key problems. First off, with kill all monsters, of course, if you're having to go and hunt down one of those monsters, that's effectively backtracking, right? You're running through an empty space. And the other aspect of it is that the sort of the intensity curve of the excitement in the dungeon is going down. You're backtracking through a bunch of empty space. And then when you get there, it's not going to be an exciting moment. Yeah. It's going to be four monsters hiding in the corner, and you're going to kill them, and it's going to feel sort of well, I guess that was a requirement that I had to turn
It's one
off.
spider.
Right?
Yeah, it's almost similar to Den of Evil, Diablo 2 feel and so forth, but now them being able to seek you out means less backtracking, less hunting in corners for that one fallen or wherever.
Well, yeah, and the other thing I like about it is that it increases the intensity at the end of the dungeon, right? Because you have the monsters, you're still clearing the last monsters, and now you have monsters running at you. But what was your experience with these changes?
Yeah, so this was probably my #1 complaint about the beta was the backtracking. I'd often, in a dungeon at some point, reach a point where I'm like, okay, I have to run back or I have to go look for a monster. And with these changes, I don't think I ever had one of those moments, or at least, I'm not going to say there was zero backtracking, but there wasn't enough that it would have come up as an issue that I would have complained about. I know some people, say, oh, suck it up, backtracking has always been part of Diablo, it's part of the game. But like the changes made hasn't made the experience linear. It's not like, oh, now we just have 1 quarter to go down. As you were saying, like now if you do go on a side path, there could be things to run into, but just overall, everything from an experience standpoint just flows a lot better.
I know with beta learnings and everything that we took in from the community and we posted on the blog, we actually had a big question in regards to dungeons and resetting dungeons and how that actually works. And I do want to take some time for you guys to be able to clarify a little bit, because there's tons of questions, and then we tried to clarify, and I think we made it worse. So we're gonna
re-clarify the clarification.
Exactly.
Yes. So the reset dungeon button, right? So we added this button earlier in development when there wasn't an easy way for dungeons to reset naturally. In fact, the way we added it led to some undesirable secondary effects because it was instant. It didn't care if you were inside the dungeon. It doesn't care if the dungeon is partially completed. If you're a hardcore character and you're in danger, you can just press it and presto, you're all good. And since we initially added this button, the amount of time for dungeons
t'as un
to
bouton
reset
pour escape
organically,
direct des donjons si
we've
c'est
been
chaud,
working
c'est
with
bien
our
ça.
online team, and we've been making changes to, over the course of development, like how Town Portal works, how Dungeon Reset work. And so the way that it works today, if you are outside the dungeon, and if everyone from your party is outside the dungeon, so if you're alone, just you, and there are no town portals open in the dungeon, then the dungeon will naturally reset over a period of about 60 seconds, about 30 seconds of matchmaking and 30 seconds of cleanup. Or if it's partially completed, like maybe you got halfway through and you're like, you know what, I have to do something else, I'm going to go, kill a world boss, or, I want to do something else now. Then it'll take a little bit longer to reset. It takes about 150 seconds, but it'll still reset naturally pretty quickly. And the other case here is that you've got maybe you're doing the dungeon and there's some particular objective in the dungeon or side quest in the dungeon, and someone, one of your friends joins and they want to do that side quest too, right? But maybe you've already completed it in this dungeon. So you can also hop out of the dungeon, which you can use through the Leave Dungeon button right in the UI as well. It does have a short cast time, so
not as quick, yeah.
But it's right through the UI. You can do it from anywhere. Invite the other person to the party, to your friend to the party, make them leader, hop in, you'll get a fresh dungeon as well.
Yeah, so hopefully that clarifies. You can still reset. Resetting dungeons is still a thing in D4. It's just we removed the button essentially, so you just have to wait a little bit longer for the dungeons themselves to reset. And I did want to go over two two specific changes that we also obtained through beta that we didn't actually report on the blog. One you actually tweeted about, which was about ultra-wide screens,
yes, and
being able to control cast distance and so forth, and with specific abilities and whatnot. So people who are using ultra-wide or mega ultra-wide screens wouldn't be able to essentially cast to the furthest corner of their screen and be able to use abilities in that type of way. And then one other thing that we did notice during beta, which was world boss encounters, and how players would actually complete a world boss encounter and then go back to town and then find another way of being able to, in that same window, go through another world boss encounter to obtain multiple opportunities of grabbing loot, which is something that we also did address through the beta learnings that we received from players. So
that's true. Now, I'll point out that the first time you kill a world boss in a week, you are going to get more loot than you'll get on subsequent times. So there's additional incentive to like there's less incentive to try to like find a way to like kill the same world boss 10 times, but you certainly will get some rewards from subsequent.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not the exact rewards or a clone of the rewards that you got from the first kill themselves. Great. I know we ended up learning a ton from the community in regards to the beta. Obviously, you guys got to hear a little bit about the endgame systems within Diablo 4. We do have a cool... What's this?
Is it time for a surprise?
Is it time for a surprise? It is time for a surprise.
J'espère que cette vidéo vous aura plu. On se retrouve bientôt pour une prochaine vidéo. N'hésitez pas à vous abonner à la chaîne. Ciao.